never imagined that working as a night watchman would be so disturbing. It was just the wind. Each night the street grew stranger. A new family moved in, but always at night. Is someone in there? The street was testing me.
Did you see that? The thing on camera?
I've seen these things for years. I never imagined that working as a night watchman would be so disturbing. It was just the wind.
Phase 1.
The street is cursed. The houses, the people who come here don't stay.
But what does this have to do with that creature?
It's not a creature, Lucas. It's what the street brings.
There's someone in my yard. I saw him through the window. Please help! He's there, but there's nobody outside.
You need to understand the
I warned you, Lucas. The street chooses us.
What? Wait, I don't.
I've seen many Watchmen disappear. I was chosen too. You're next. The street never lets the Watchmen go.
No, I can't be a part of this. I'm just another legend now. The street chose me.
And the story continues.
Your priority is not fighting.
No matter how hard you try to run.
There's someone in my...
If you can hold the line for 72 hours, your survival rate increases by 800%.
Lucas had always been the type of teenager who defied everything and everyone. Rebellion was his trademark, and his routine seemed like an endless nightmare, with constant problems at school, conflicts with his parents, and the feeling that the whole world was against him. What bothered him most wasn't the frustration of not being understood, but the lack of purpose, the incessant search for something that would pull him out of the monotony of his own life. However, everything changed when his father decided to apply the most severe punishment possible to get him a job. So, at 17, Lucas found himself forced to work as a night watchman on a street in a luxurious neighborhood on the outskirts of a city he barely knew. The choice of job wasn't random. His father wanted him to understand the importance of responsibility and effort. But Lucas never imagined what awaited him on those lonely nights in those elegant and silent streets. The first night was quiet. He was assigned to watch over an isolated sector on the most secluded street in the neighborhood. The place seemed too calm, almost unreal, with imposing mansions and well-kept gardens, where tranquility seemed to be the only rule. The security cameras, contrary to what Lucas imagined, didn't show much beyond what the environment already conveyed. No action, no movement. The peace was disconcerting. During the night, Lucas simply sat in the small glass booth with music in his headphones and watched the screens without much interest. However, he soon noticed something strange. Something he couldn't immediately understand, but which bothered him. The houses in the neighborhood were being occupied by new families at an alarming rate. Every 2 or 3 weeks, a house would become empty, and soon after, another would be occupied, with the same moving trucks arriving in the early hours of the morning. There were no goodbyes, only the muffled sound of cars and the frantic traffic that disappeared before dawn. Nobody seemed to care, not even the other security guards. It was in this bizarre setting that Lucas began to hear the first strange sounds. Initially, he thought it was just the wind in the trees or the creaking of the electric fences trying to adjust to the night temperature. But as the days passed, he began to hear something else, something he couldn't ignore. Muffled whispers and screams, as if someone were in agony inside one of the houses. It was a disconcerting feeling, a feeling he couldn't explain. That night, the screams were louder, and they were different, as if they lived in a place beyond his comprehension. Lucas stood up from his chair and looked at the security cameras. There was nothing wrong. Everything seemed calm, but he knew that what he was hearing wasn't coming from his head. He could swear the sounds were coming from inside the houses, but not from one specific house. It was as if they were echoes of something evil, spreading to every corner of the street. He then decided to go out and investigate. He felt the need to find out what was happening there, to confront the darkness that surrounded him. When he reached the street corner, what he found was even more terrifying. He saw the silhouette of a figure moving in the shadows, a creature with long, thin limbs, moving like an animal, but with something very wrong about its posture. Its eyes, reflecting the distant light of the lamps, shone like beacons in an endless night. At that moment, Lucas knew that this was not normal. Something dark and evil was lurking, and he was trapped in this nightmare with no way out. It was only the beginning, and the worst was yet to come. Lucas tried to ignore the strange sensation that gripped his body as he returned to the guard post. The creature he had seen in the street was distant, disappearing into the darkness like a fleeting shadow, but the unease seemed to follow him closely. He closed the glass door of the security post, locked it carefully, and sat down, trying not to think about what he had witnessed. The clock showed 3 in the morning. The street was empty, too silent. He knew he was becoming paranoid. But what had he seen? It wasn't something you'd simply forget. It was a skeletal, almost inhuman figure that seemed to move unnaturally, as if it weren't of this world. With each passing second, the memory of it deepened in his mind, creating a black hole of fear. But what terrified him most was the fact that nothing made sense. He looked at the camera monitor, hoping to see something, anything that would rationally explain what was happening. But the screen showed only the emptiness of the street, the dim lights, and the deadly silence that dominated the upscale neighborhood. He tried to relax, but the tension was palpable. That's when he heard it again. A low, muffled sound came from the house furthest away. The sound of something being dragged. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the cracking of trees. It was something much closer and much stranger. He stood up suddenly, feeling his heart beat faster. The pressure of something undefined and threatening enveloped him. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he needed to get out of there. Don't be an idiot, he thought to himself. It's just a natural noise. You're getting carried away. But when he looked again out the window of the lookout post, the street seemed different. The darkness was denser, as if it were swallowing itself, and a thin mist began to form, gradually covering the ground, as if the street itself were breathing. He couldn't take it anymore. Overcome by an irrational need to understand what was happening, Lucas grabbed the key and left his guard post. The cold of the early morning cut into his skin, but he barely noticed, absorbed by the tension that gripped him. He walked slowly down the street, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the growing fog. He knew something was watching him, but he didn't know what. As he approached the house where the sounds had begun, the feeling of being watched intensified. The trees swayed gently, but the atmosphere was quieter than usual. There was no more birdsong or rustling of the wind. Everything was still, as if time had been suspended. He approached the front door, hesitating for a moment before pushing it open. The door was locked, as expected, but when he looked at the window, his stomach churned. The curtains were moving on their own, as if something inside the house was dragging them. He swallowed hard and took a step back, but the sound continued, now louder. Muffled, desperate screams that seemed to emanate from the walls of the house. Desperate, Lucas ran back to the guard post. He needed to tell someone, anyone. But when he got there, he found Marcos sitting in the chair as if nothing had happened. Marcos seemed too calm, and when Lucas looked at him, his face was strange, expressionless, as if he were absorbed by something he didn't understand. You heard the screams, didn't you? Lucas asked, trying to remain calm, but his voice betrayed the fear. Marcos looked at him, his eyes empty, and said in a soft, almost disinterested voice, "Do you know what this place is like, Lucas? This street, it's not like the others." Lucas was confused, trying to understand what Marcos meant, but he continued. "Here, everything is cyclical. Families come and go, people disappear, and the things that happen must remain unexplained. The street is cursed. It always has been." Lucas's fear intensified as he heard those words. He felt their weight settling in his chest. He had seen the creature, he had heard the screams, but what he was beginning to understand was far more terrifying than any image or sound. He was in a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. Marcos stood up and went to the window, looking out as if he were waiting for something. Here, evil hides. It hides in the shadows, in people's fears. No one stays for long. Everyone leaves or disappears. Lucas remained silent, feeling his heart beat faster. He wanted to ask more questions. He wanted to understand, but he didn't have the courage. The fear was now palpable, almost tangible. He knew something was there, watching him, waiting for the right moment to attack him. "Did you see what I saw?" Lucas asked, his voice choked with emotion. That thing, that creature. It wasn't human. Marcos didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Lucas with a blank stare and finally said, "I've seen many things. Things you're not ready to see yet." And then, the loudest sound Lucas had ever heard echoed through the street. It wasn't muffled screams. It wasn't just strange sounds. It was the sound of something running, dragging itself, crawling in the shadows, coming toward him. Lucas felt panic gripping him. The air felt thick, oppressive. She looked at Marcos, who was still motionless, and then, not knowing what to do, ran for the door. The sound was closer now, much closer. He could almost feel the presence of whatever was chasing him. He looked back. Marcos was no longer there. He was alone. Lucas ran down the street, his feet sliding across the damp pavement as the sound of the creature drew closer. He knew he wouldn't be able to escape, but he couldn't stop. Each step took him a little further from his lookout post, but also brought him closer to something he couldn't comprehend. The fear was so intense he could barely breathe. He looked back, trying to see something, anything that would show he still had control over the situation. But what he saw was a deep emptiness, a darkness that seemed to swallow everything around him. He was in a nightmare from which he could not wake up. When he finally reached the end of the street, he found what seemed to be the end of his journey. The door of one of the mansions was open, inviting him to enter. He didn't know why, but something compelled him to go there. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was desperation, but he knew he had no choice. Evil was at the door, and he needed to confront it. Upon entering the house, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The interior was completely different from what he had imagined. There was no furniture, only bare, dark walls, as if time had stopped there. He looked into the corners of the room and saw shadows moving as if they were watching him. But the worst was yet to come. A figure approached slowly, a familiar silhouette. It was Marcos, but something was wrong with him. His face was pale, his eyes empty, as if he were no longer human. He stood there, looking directly at Lucas, a sinister smile on his lips. "You finally understood," Marcos said, his voice a mixture of weariness and resignation. "The street, Lucas, it chose you." Lucas tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. "I couldn't understand what was happening. I knew I was trapped in a cycle that would never end. People disappeared, the security guards went crazy, and the street continued to swallow its victims. You'll be next," Marcos continued. "The next Watchman. They always come back, they always choose someone to take their place. Because the streets never rest." Lucas sensed the creature's presence behind him, its claws scratching the stone floor. He turned quickly, but all he saw was darkness. There was no one else there. He was alone. Panic gripped his body. He ran towards the door, trying to escape, but the shadows held him back, dragging him back inside the house. He screamed, but no one heard him. The street was empty again, as always. It was at that moment that Lucas understood the truth. He had been chosen, just like Marcos. He was part of the cycle, a piece in a macabre story that would never end. No matter how much he tried to escape, the street would keep him there as it had kept everyone else before him. He was now part of the evil that haunted that dark street. And then, in his last lucid breath, Lucas saw his own silhouette reflected in the walls of the house. He knew his story was coming to an end, but that somehow it would perpetuate itself. The street would continue to swallow lives, one after another, and Lucas would become just another forgotten legend. The street would never rest.